And welcome to episode number 560 of the HaskinCast Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and before I bring on my guest today, as we continue our marathon of no days off, which was not an intentional thing between Deep Purple Smoke on the podcast and the HaskinCast Podcast, we've been rolling for like a week and a half without any breaks. Got podcasts coming to you all the way through, I think, next Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. I really hope that you guys enjoyed the 4-part series I did from the new release of Cherry Red Records on the Macaulay Schenker Group. And, of course, my second part of my 4-part series with my buddy Mark Roback from the 70s Weekly Countdown with Mark and Pete, covering TV themes, which is a really interesting one. I'm anxious to get out those other 2 episodes to you guys. But today, I have something really different, something that is brand new to me as long as I've been in music. And I'm really excited to learn about it, to find out what it's all about, and most importantly, to share it with you guys. As always, there are links in the show notes that you can go and check out this stuff for yourself. Let's welcome our guest to find out what it's all about. 10,000 Airplanes. How is it going?
It's going good. It's going good. I'm excited to be on the show. So my uncle has been on in the past, and I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and your uncle and I are very dear friends. We went to high school together. We've worked on books and projects together. A really great guy. And when he told me about you and what you do, before he even said that you would be a good guest for the show, I thought, I got to get this guy on the show.
Fair. Yeah, it's out there. It's definitely on the fringes of what people like normally think about and talk about with like music, especially.
I think that's fair. Now, I've listened to some of the stuff that you've got posted, and I really am curious about how you put it together, because there's some specific things that I've seen that I'm curious about. But just to give an idea of what it is that we're talking about, what is it called and how do you define it?
So I personally take into like 2 different like categories of like work, almost, I guess you could say. I do a mix of a thing called the drone, which evolved out of the ambient music scene, and then also a thing called noise and like more harsh noise like wall kind of thing, which developed out of a whole plethora of places. A good chunk of the work that I have released is falling a lot more into that like drone category. It developed out of the ambient scene, and it's defined as like very continuous tones and like continuous sounds that kind of build up and break down and kind of envelop, but it's like a very consistent driving factor throughout. And then noise developed mainly out of like, it was a combination of, I think, a lot of like the industrial scene and like Nine Inch Nails and people like that, and some different like electronics movements and the electronic scenes. There's elements of like free jazz and like free improvisation that's prevalent in a lot of noise. And like noise as a genre is like it's a very big conglomerate of a bunch of different like scenes and a bunch of different movements that have developed into kind of what it is. So that's
I think would you say a term like soundscape for some of it might be fair?
Yeah, especially with drone. There's a really big thing like it's good background music almost, and it's kind of like soundscape drone, and you're kind of like, especially like what I do as for like my drone stuff is very much trying to envelop like images and like pictures through like different soundscapes and like just like lush movements, and like it's very much exactly like a soundscape of things. Yeah.
I think what I find interesting about it is it's really it's an audio experience, in the way that you're like living through something. And to give an example, I guess song would still be the right term, but your song Weather, for example, which you guys can find on SoundCloud. The link is in the show notes. I was listening to that the other day, and I'm thinking, well, first of all, it's interesting because when I moved from Las Vegas to Tulsa, I was stuck overnight in a town a couple of hours away, and this is in November, and I actually woke up to tornado sirens and things, which I thought was really odd for November.
Yeah.
but I recorded some of that and I'm using that on my new album. And then I was listening to yours and you start off with that same sort of, tornado
Yeah.
siren and the weather
Mm.
sounds. So that really resonated with me. And I love the sounds of weather anyway.
Yeah.
But when it's almost like you feel like you're in a shed out in the
Mm.
middle of the wilderness and
Yeah.
this storm is just passing all around you and
Yeah.
you're trapped.
Yeah. Funnily, the funny thing about like going off of that, the main sample that you hear within the track itself,
Mhm.
especially a lot of my work, I do a lot of work with like sample manipulation and manipulating samples.
Right.
And that song in particular, the main like driving force with it, there was a video of, I forget the tornado. I think it was like one in 2011,
Mhm.
but there's a video of a tornado hitting somebody's house, and they set up a camera like within that, and then they were capturing the video and the audio of the tornado actively like approaching them.
Wow.
And that I had like taken and then like manipulated and did added reverb. There was like a bunch of different like effects and stuff added alongside of that, but the main driving like punching thing within the song was like quite a sample of some dude's like house going through a tornado and the audio that that captured.
Wow.
So
And
that album,
it doesn't get much more authentic than that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that L, oh,
I was going to
oh,
say it's really interesting because think about how that must have been recorded to where they were able to capture a good sound. It's not like they really had time to set up and sound test against the weather coming at them, and then
yeah,
how loud is it going to get when they can't be in the room with it. That's a
yeah,
really kind of an intense, somewhat planning and somewhat luck.
yeah, it is. It's at least with like that one, it very much was reliant on like luck. What they
Mhm.
ended up doing, at least with that, is there's like people talking about the sample. They set up their phone just in the area on I think the second floor, and then went to the basement about 2 minutes before the tornado actually hit, just
Mhm.
watching it develop. A good chunk of that was very much like, I'll see if my phone survives. I am unsure if I'm personally going to.
Right.
If something does happen, this will be a remnant of like what happened.
Mhm.
And at least with that, it has like a very like impromptu, like, oh well, let's just see if I can do it. But it also adds a very like, I guess like human element to it of like the video, at least with watching it, it's like a sense of dread just washes over as you see
Yeah.
like this black void approach this dude's like window, and then
Mhm.
eventually everything just goes like insane. And like that kind of dread is both in the video, but you can also feel it as like a person and like at an emotional level, which
Mhm.
is like something that I try and capture with like my music especially.
And I think it's definitely captured in the song. I mean, starting
Mm,
off the way it does, you already feel like there's just impending doom headed your
yeah.
way.
Mm,
And you, like I said, you get that feeling like you're trapped. There's really not escaping it. You're just kind of
mm,
clutching your knees to your chest and hoping that you're going to be okay when it's over.
yeah. And just kind of like, yeah, it's like a very much like it's a very human thing of you just need to see where this thing will go and see
Right.
how you can survive this kind of thing, which
Mhm.
I think is a very it's I think it's just really interesting.
Now I
That
got it.
album that album in particular kind of developed off of an interest that I had with general weather movements.
Mhm.
There wasn't really like a cohesive like thought process behind it. The main like driving factor was I want to work with the elements and like work with different like I want to work with like very nature driven things and see where it comes up with. And so that was like the main like creative inspiration behind the album, was very much like I want to see what I can do with weather and weather sounds and meteorological events. So
Right.
that was like
Yeah.
the
And
big thing with that.
I want to talk to you about how you do some sound manipulation,
Mhm.
but first, are you the kind of person, because that's kind of what you're attuned to? As a drummer, for me, I hear the world in rhythms. I'll
Yeah.
be walking down the street, the way that the cars pass by and the rush of that wind will
Mhm.
create a potential rhythm or pattern for me. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, okay, perfect. So you're a drummer as
Yeah.
well. So do you have that then with soundscapes as well when you're just out,
Yeah.
you hear things and you're like, okay, here's what I could do with that?
Yeah. Especially with like hearing out and like in nature and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
that can also get into a tangent of like the more noise stuff that I do.
Hmm.
Um, I hear a lot of like, it's not even like there's rhythms and beats that I can pick out. I'll hear something and like my first thought is like, I can make a movement out of this. Like I can make like sound and like textures out of it. And it's not
Hmm.
even thinking in terms of like, oh, like what can I do like rhythm wise and like beat wise? It's a lot of like, what can I do like soundscape wise? Like what can develop from this like very simple idea and see where that takes me.
Right. Well, and
So,
that makes sense. You're
mm,
going to just naturally, your ears will perk up to whatever it is that you're in tune to. For me,
yeah.
as my primary instrument is drums, but I also write a lot of, ambient music as well.
Mm,
I tend to hear rhythm first and then ambient second. But if you're,
yeah.
obviously in tune to both, those are really going to just draw your attention. Now, I noticed that you, and this is not surprising to me, but I
Mm,
noticed that you really like organic sound manipulation. And what I mean by that is you like taking sounds and just twisting them without trying to recreate them. You're using
mm,
effects, you're using interesting recording techniques. Is
mm.
this, is it, like, how did that come together? Because that's something
Yeah.
that really takes a creative brain to be able to even start going down that path.
Yeah. A good chunk of like that especially kind of came from like the starting the project itself.
Mhm.
When I started it, I didn't really want to like invest in like synthesizers or stuff like that. And like I didn't want to invest in the materials required to make and replicate sound.
Mhm.
And so it kind of developed, well, like I want to still take some of these ideas and then do them in a different way. And so that's where kind of like the manipulation side of like what I do with tape and like, stuff like that kind of developed.
Okay.
I work a lot with feedback, especially.
Mhm.
A good chunk of like what I will do is I work a lot with like feedback loops and
Mhm.
manipulating like feedback and how that interacts. I use a lot of VCV Rack in like my work, which is an
Okay.
online modular synth.
Mhm.
And what that lets me do is I can take like the WAV file or like the sample itself and then run it into like three different reverbs and then have like an oscillator tracking the like signal and everything for the like sample and run that in and then feed all of that reverb and like delays and other modulation and like effects back into itself and then
Mhm.
record the sound of that. And a lot of like that especially is just recording feedback and messing with and like manipulating different feedback and how it interacts with itself and the sample and oscillator. It's a lot of like just cycling effects and
Mhm.
things through themselves and through different things and like mangling a very simple sound into a bunch of different complex weird like crescendos
Mhm.
almost.
Right. And have you gotten to the point, and I mean, this would certainly, I would think, take years, but have you gotten to the point where you just walk in, you know what you want it to sound like, and you know how to make it happen? Or is it just a lot of experimentation until you get what you want?
It's a mix of both.
Hmm.
What I will, it's it's very like I have like very set ideas of what I want the thing to sound like originally. It's
Hmm.
a lot of experimentation to find patches that fit into that like vision.
Hmm.
And so what it'll end up being is like I'll have an idea for a sample or a song and like something that I want to do, and then I will like basically just like keep punching at it and like stabbing at it with different patches, putting things in different places, and like keep working at this one idea until I get something that's close to what I was trying to replicate, like in
Right.
my head.
Hmm.
And so it starts from like a very like set place of I want to do this thing and I want it to sound like this and I want it to have these movements, and then it's developing that into how I want it to sound, like personally, and getting like patches and like systems and things that fit into that idea.
Well, and that makes perfect sense. I think going in with a vision really helps. Sometimes you can
Yeah.
get some really cool results just playing around and seeing what you can
Mhm.
come up with. But if you can walk in going, here's what I've got, and here's what I want to end up with,
Mhm.
then it really narrows down the time. It keeps the idea consistent.
Mhm.
Although I would imagine there's something to be said for just spontaneity. While you're working on that, you might do something and go, wait a minute, though. I kind of like
Yeah,
that better.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
that does happen a lot. Also on Weather, there was a song called, I think it's Trapped Under Ice. And that was recorded by, I froze a microphone inside like a cup of ice and
Wow.
then just recorded the sound of that melting through a reverb,
Mhm.
and in just kind of messing around with it. It was very much like like I had no idea how it was going to sound. I just wanted to test that from like a personal, like, oh, well, how would this thing sound? And
Right.
it developed into an actual song on the album
Mhm.
because of me just like wanting to mess around and see where this idea would take me.
I
So
like that.
there's definitely a level of like spontaneousness and like
Mhm.
improvisation with what I do, but it all kind of is improving within a lens of like a vision that I have for the song or whatever.
Right, but and that kind of experimentation then could lead to a lot of other things because you're not going to know the result unless you give it a shot. Even if you're not knowing whether you can use it or not. If you're like,
Yeah.
I just wonder what it would be like if I did this, and then if I
Yeah.
come out with something great, I can use it. But if not, I've got a new technique in my repertoire.
Yeah, like I know if this works or I
Mm-hmm.
know if this doesn't work, and like kind of it lets me like prepare more for like different projects or stuff like that.
Right, and can certainly give you ideas for the future. But did you have any damage to the mic from freezing it?
No. I had it with me in my bag. It's a friend of mine makes piezo like contact mics. So
Okay.
it was this guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a green like microphone with just it's basically just a disc within it.
Right.
And normally they pick up the vibration of like whatever instrument you have it on. It's
Mm-hmm.
used a lot in like violins to make acoustic electric stuff.
Right.
But people, especially in like the experimental crowd, will take them and like put them and use them as an instrument. And you're able to like rub it on like sandpaper or Velcro, or you're able to put it on different objects. And like they use contact mics in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
The really nice thing about these is that they're made by a really good friend of mine, Nick Pryor, and he coated them in silicone to make them waterproof. And he
Nice.
was very much like, he wanted people to be able to dig around in like water or record ice and like do that. And so he was very like, yeah, I'm gonna coat it in silicone. And then that's where that came from. And so yeah, it kind of developed with wanting to take what the instrument was designed to do and make it into the thing that it was designed to do, basically.
I love the idea. I remember when I got my first sequencer, there
Mhm.
was a note in the manual that said, don't think of the sounds as the sounds they are. So, in other words, don't think of a bass guitar as just serving the function of a bass guitar. Think about
Yeah.
the sound itself and what are the possibilities it might have. And that's kind of always sparked a thing for me about we're not really limited to labels or anything like that. You can really turn anything into anything.
I think it was the 303 kind of going. It was some synthesizer that I can't forget. I forget the name of, but it
Mm-hmm.
was very much they were trying to replicate the sound of a bass guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and it just sounded awful. It sounded nothing like a bass, like at all.
Mm-hmm.
But it was picked up like really big into like the hardware techno like rave scene and was used as like the key like synthesizer for that sound. And it
Yeah.
develops into like it's taking things that it was originally designed to emulate bass guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and it turned into like an actual a different thing. And I think that level of just like creativity of using things differently than how they were intended is like really powerful stuff in music, especially.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think we're also trained as listeners to pick up the sound of, say, a bass guitar or a drum and just think of it in those terms. But if
Yeah.
you're putting it to use in
Mhm.
a completely different way, you can retrain the listener
Yeah.
through your own process.
Yeah, exactly. You
You
can
know,
like you can almost like you can like re-envision what you think something sounds like, and
right.
that can be like a really powerful like movement for especially like experimental music.
Hmm. No, exactly. Another thing, and I don't know people outside of like audio engineering or sound design would really think about this, but
Mhm.
the order of which you do things is extremely important. So if you're putting
Yeah.
a delay before a reverb or a
Mhm.
reverb before a delay, you're going to get a completely different effect.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's very careful the order of operation that you have to use too.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Like there's a very like especially like I will test like different reverbs and like where they fall. Like it's a lot of just like brute forcing because like yeah, like
Mhm.
little differences of like I adjust the mix knob on this one reverb by like 5% and now the entire thing sounds completely different.
Right.
And like managing and finding like how to cope with like how drastically little changes in order and like sound can drastically change something.
Right. And it's a lot of fun. I've done just a little bit of sound design work for film. I've done more, more composing than anything else, but even though those rare opportunities when I get to do some sound design, it feels like such an open canvas.
Yeah.
You have like your outline of what you want the picture to look like, but it just feels like there's so many different ways to get there and what's the most efficient or what's going to be the best final product. And you
Yeah.
try this and you try that. I find it more fun experimenting than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. That leads especially into like the like harsh noise stuff.
Hmm.
I like it's almost like sound design almost. I try and not necessarily even like invoke like I try to invoke texture and I try to like make and change and develop textures that are
Hmm.
then translated into different songs. And that's like the biggest thing that I try and do, like
Well, and
for the
even
noise stuff.
yeah, I mean, even just listening to the different songs on like your SoundCloud account or your Bandcamp account,
Yeah.
um, you really get the sense that each one is really its own world.
Yeah.
You
It's
there's like a familiarity to it that you could tell that it was one person that did it that came up with the ideas, but at the same point, it's like each one really is an individual piece.
yeah, each one is like its own like set of ideas and its own
Hmm.
set of like conditions that then are turned into music and sound art and whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious because you're not working with a typical song structure, like a verse, chorus, bridge type thing.
Mhm.
I always like to ask people, how do you determine when it's done? At what point are you like, okay, I've got what I want. The song needs to be this long. It doesn't need to be any longer. We're ending here.
Yeah. So it really depends. What I normally like to do, especially, is decide on an album length and like very much decide like how long do I want this whole release to be, and then basically just experiment within like that length to find the kind of track lengths.
Hmm.
At least for my like more like ambient like droning stuff, a lot of it like it kind of swells and it kind of like morphs in a way with like adjusting knobs and like how the feedback interacts. And eventually, after a lot of like, after the different movements and stuff, eventually there's always a point in like the patch that I have where things kind of start to like break in like the best sense of it. It'll start to like build down or like start to clip and stuff like that. And then that gives me about when it's the cue to like, all right, it's time to end this one. It's time to bring this one down.
Hmm.
But it's a lot of like just feeling how the piece itself, like how it interacts with itself, and then recording that and then cutting it off when it's like either a ran its course or like it's starting to like interact in non-favorable ways with itself.
Right.
It's being very in tune with, how the patch sounds and how it like functions and behaves. A good chunk of like I'll set up a patch and then I'll leave it going for like 2 hours or something like that. Like almost like a ridiculous amount of time just listening to like the little nuances and changes that it makes, for then like resetting it and then going, all right, this is where it'll start, and kind of developing it and bringing it to its end after it kind of functions and works almost.
Right. Well, I mean, that's definitely a very wise and interesting approach.
Mhm.
It feels like too, from what I listen to, that you, much like me, you don't like hard stops. You
Yep.
like to just let it breathe and air out, and kind of diminish. Um, my reasoning for that is, especially with my relaxation music, is that I don't want people to come out of that relaxed state. The whole idea is to just keep you relaxed and not, there's no heavy percussion crescendo or lightning strike or anything that's going to take you out of that. But for you, it seems like it helps it flow so nicely.
Yeah. That's one thing I like. That's a really big thing with like noise, like in performing live. That's like the biggest thing of like knowing kind of when things are finished, like knowing when things have like exhausted their, knowing when to end its a set is, I
Mhm.
would argue, more important than what goes on within the set. And that's like a very defining feature, especially with what I do, is trying to figure out how to end this piece and how to end this movement into
Mhm.
stuff. And like it very much is trying to like wind down and stuff like that. It's not even, at least you mentioned like bring out of relaxation. I try not to bring people out of like specific like feelings or like thought
Right.
processes.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think having, like, depending on the thing, having a very hard stop can end that like feeling almost.
Mhm.
Though I think depending on how it's used, it can also kind of influence and help a feeling of like, I'm gonna go with like dread.
Mhm.
I have a song on an album I just recently released. Um, and the whole thing is like building up with like someone's reading off like a Bible verse.
Okay.
And then throughout the song, there's like a really big like build up of like static and like crunching textures. And then eventually it builds up and it's just that. And then it cuts off.
Mhm.
And then the original sound from that piece is brought back in. And at least with me and like listening to it, I think that helps with like the feeling that I was trying to capture of like dread and almost like the end of the world, where
Mhm.
the cutoff right when the static stops is like right when the world ends, and everything after this is like the aftermath of like whatever it is that's happening, and like kind of the build down of things
Mhm.
like that. So it depends on the vibes, especially of like if it's going to be hard stop into a different movement, or it
Mhm.
swells into something else almost.
Yeah, from what I was listening to, it sounded a lot more transitionary. Like you're guiding people from one state into another, and very
Yeah.
well, because I didn't feel like I was. I felt like I had moved from one place to another, but I never felt like I had been moved from one place to another. And I would imagine that's kind of what you're going for.
Yeah, that goes a lot into like specific like drone interactions and
Yeah.
how drone kind of works. It very much is like you want to go on a journey, and you
Hmm.
want to like, and that's part of why they have like very continuous sounds, is like it helps the listener kind of move and develop to specific areas without like it being as abrupt as, a song change or something like that. It kind of
Right.
can be guiding to different things.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned that you do this live. What is your what kind of venues do you get to display this music? Because again, like you're not thinking dance clubs or anything like that. You've
Yeah.
got to find places that it seems more like a background to and I hope this is not offensive because I don't mean it that way, but it seems like a background to like a place where you would read poetry.
Yeah. Totally. It depends, especially on the vibes that I'm going for.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of like record stores and stuff that there's a record store down in the Springs called What's Left Records. and they do a lot of noise stuff, and like they will host like noise stuff there. And like I recently played in Noise Floor up in Fort Collins, which is at the Museum of Arts up there.
Okay.
And it's like in the top floor of a museum. There's dedicated venues to noise within Denver. There's one called the DMV, which is it's a dedicated noise like venue, and that's like their
Wow.
niche that they've tapped into.
Hmm.
And it really depends on the vibe and like where people are going to kind of be at, and kind of tailoring it to who I assume will be in it's a lot of like tailoring and like figuring out stuff almost.
Right. I would think like art museums, any place where you could use ambience without it being something to focus specifically on, like you would pay attention to lyrics or something like that. It's more like
Yeah.
enhancing the experience, like the way a film score would.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a mix of like me like actively trying to like make very passive like background ambience, and a lot of
Mhm.
stuff that's like I want people to be like attentive and like focus on this thing and bring into almost like a meditative like just like feeling and processing like emotion or whatever is
Right.
going on.
Hmm.
And so that kind of goes especially like into live stuff of people are going to like see a show and see people perform this kind of stuff, and like being very like intentful with the sounds that I'm creating and how they're created and when they fall and the work itself, and like being
Hmm.
very intentful with where things go and how things like being very intentful with that aspect of stuff is a really big part of it, of ensuring if I want people to be very like passively listening, ensuring that they are, or if I want people to be focused on what's going on, like being very intentful with being focused and making sure people retain their attention on what's going on.
Right. Do you want them to also, like, are there some times where you want them to just experiencing it without realizing they're experiencing it? Like, just kind of have it there in present, but not necessarily be their primary focus?
Not It really depends. Most of
Mhm.
the shows that I've played, I've been very intentful and like very much of I want people to be experiencing this. Like I want people to be aware of what's going on and seeing the performance and seeing this and like being very alert in what they're doing, and like
Mhm.
being very aware of everything around them, including the performance. Though that is something I have wanted to do. I have had like weird ideas for shows pop up where it'll be like, oh, I'll do something like I like I'll do something and like set up in like a public place, and it's there's a thing in like I forget where it came from, but if you put a frog in boiling water and start to turn the temperature up over a period of time with the frog in it,
Mhm.
the frog isn't going to realize that it's being cooked until it's already like halfway there.
Right.
And almost like doing that of like starting a set and then slowly building up a movement and a sound, and like slowly
Mhm.
building it up while people don't even realize that it's building up until you know someone walks in just like, what's that sound, and then you're brought out of a meditative state almost.
That's interesting. I think that could be a really fascinating way to just work with the brain.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, because you seem to find the sound and say, here's what I want to do with it. Do you ever kind of go at the opposite way where you're like, here's the mood I want to create. Now, how can I get there?
A little bit, yeah. It's a mix of both.
Mm-hmm.
Like it depends on like I like especially like what I'm going for. Um, it really depends on what I find first. I
Mm-hmm.
will go out and seek samples a lot of the time and like look for samples and pieces that I can use. But it's also a lot of I will collect them and then take them. It really depends on what I'm trying to go for. Like, let's say I harp on dread a lot, but like I'm gonna say like I want to invoke a feeling of dread, and then I go out and find a sample that I can then manipulate
Mhm.
into that feeling and like that for a vibe. It really depends on what I find first is the biggest
Right.
thing.
Because I mean, you could even take a happy chirping bird and turn that into
Yeah,
dread. You know, you slow it down, you put some effects on it, you run it through your feedback loop, and
yeah,
next thing you know, it sounds like the pit of hell.
yeah. Funnily enough, I don't have it. Actually, I do. I did a split with a friend of mine. It's this, and during the recording for it, towards the very, very end, he had like used the sounds of birds chirping
Hmm.
and like ran that through delay and like messed around with like the speed of the tape and like was very like, like literally just messed around with birds chirping
Hmm.
and like doing that and like but yeah, no, it very much is like just kind of like invoking sounds from different things and taking a sound and trying to get it to be how you want it, at least for what I do.
Right. I know on one of the albums that I did, it was a horror album, and I played around with a program called Paul Stretch, which just takes the
Mhm.
audio and stretches it out. You can from you know taking a 1 second sample to 5-10 minutes, and it's
Mhm.
insane. Even the most minimal amount of effort, what you can do to manipulate a sound, the kind of stuff that you're talking about doing is really on another level. I mean, most people would not go through that trouble unless they really are sound designers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a different realm of like talking and like it's a
Mm-hmm.
different realm of just like thought process behind can like making experimental music, whether it be drone or like harsh noise or like it's a different thought process going into it of trying to make textures and sounds that you don't normally find with conventional like chorus bridge, like build up like
Yeah.
the traditional song structure.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you don't necessarily find as often.
Right. Well, I mean, in songs, you usually hard transition, right? Like,
Yeah,
here's your end of the fourth measure. Now you're into this. Now the end of the 16th measure. Now you're into this. And there's these pivot points that are kind
yeah,
of set up in a general song structure. But where you're talking about just cascading people from one thing into another, it's a process. It's
yeah.
not, okay, now we're going from this to this. It's, I'm going to gently move you from this pool of water into that pool of
Just to
water.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh, I like crescendos a lot, and but I don't think I work with crescendos especially,
Mm-hmm.
but I think a lot of like very traditional orchestral stuff and how they kind of like build up in like stuff like that. I think that that's really beautiful, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I like try and capture. Of I'm not trying to do like I'm not trying to like have like pivot points or like turns in the road. It's like
Right.
trying to have very subtle bends that that bring you to a specific place by building up on a certain sound or like cascading like down and like very like intentful about like going to a specific moment rather than pivoting and like just doing that thing and building up to where I think a song needs to go or where I want a song to go or where I
Mm-hmm.
want a set to go and stuff like that.
Well, and since I can never get away from comparing everything to a recipe for some reason,
Mhm.
I would say there are recipes where you have your all your spices measured out, and at certain times you dump in the entire cup of that spice. But there are other recipes where you put in a little bit and you fold that in, and once that dissolves, then you fold a little bit more and a little bit more, and the next thing you know, you've transitioned that dish from one thing to another. And I think that's probably the best way I can equate what you're doing.
Yeah, basically, yeah, it's like taking that and like, building on it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
doing that, except you don't know what the ingredients are, like
Right.
as the listener. Like especially like with a lot of those recipes, there's like very much like, oh, I need this, and this ingredient, and then eventually this is going to happen.
Right.
At least like with what I try and then I try to invoke a sense of like unpredictability
Mm-hmm.
of like I'm mixing a bunch of different like using the recipe metaphor, like I'm mixing in and kneading in and using just a bunch of really bizarre ingredients from a bunch of different like spices and everything like that, and then
Right.
making a taste like a good final product or a
Mhm.
final dish using the recipe thing.
I
So it's a
yeah,
lot of yeah,
that's kind of what I was thinking, and I'm really glad I was along the right line because I'm always worried when I'm trying to analyze something that I'm going to say something that offends somebody. So I'm glad that I was at least on the right track. Um, I'm curious with the skills that you've built so far. Could you see yourself designing sound libraries? Is that something that you'd want to head into?
it's I've debated on it.
Hmm.
Like I have some friends of mine who do a lot of like sound like field recording libraries where
Hmm.
they basically just go and collect different sounds that people will make and develop and then just publish them for people to use.
Hmm.
And I've really thought about contributing to that, especially for like in some capacity.
Right.
What I'm doing right now is very much trying to like invoke ideas that I have and not really contributing to a body of like existing work that people can then siphon from.
Hmm.
And it's something I want to do in the future of contribute and develop like a sound library, but it's not something I'm like currently both able to do nor particularly like almost want to do, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's you have to be really dedicated to it because you're also talking about hours and hours of editing WAV files for consistency and volume. And I've done
Yeah.
some editing for libraries before, and I can tell you it can be tedious work. So it is something that you really have to be dedicated to. But what I like about what you're doing and what I've heard from you so far is the creativity. It's not like other stuff I've heard. You know, even with the weather, that's not
Mm.
quite like something I've heard before. So I would say I would love to see you do something like that, but only if it's something that you're really into because it has become accessible. I mean, now we have GUI designers, and for those of you listening who aren't sound designers, the GUI is basically the interface, right? So it's the way that it looks, your dials and sliders, and what they're assigned to, how you get more or less reverb by turning a dial with your mouse, that sort of thing. It's become reasonable to be able to do it now, but what it hasn't done is become easier to make it happen.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's very much like, especially like with that, it's difficult to get the coding behind like the screen of
Yeah,
like what the thing how like it's difficult to get that stuff done, which
mm-hmm.
is really upsetting. So
Yeah.
it's easy to get the sound, it's not easy to make the sounds done in a presentable way for anyone to pull from.
Right. But I would say keep an eye on it because the technology is getting better and better all the time. And I don't think it's going to be that far off
There
before
was
it'll be easier.
there's something that's been developing now that kind of it's a meta module from BCV Rack,
Mm-hmm.
and basically what they're doing is they've programmed like a module that goes into a like regular Eurorack system
Mm-hmm.
that you're then able to program a like patch in VCV Rack to have all of the knobs and like inputs and outputs and like the like all of like the traditional like Eurorack nerd stuff
Mm-hmm.
like present and manipulate it like with other gear, but have the core of that be like Eurorack stuff, which I really appreciate. I think that in particular is like really starting to like it's kind of opening the barrier a lot more into people able to do like almost sound library stuff because you're able
Right.
to like program a module and have specific things do specific stuff and then tailor that to this module that
Mm-hmm.
anyone can use almost, and it's become a lot more accessible to take and do, like, which I think is really really sick.
Yeah, I agree. And I definitely am interested in where that technology is going to continue to grow. It's interesting too, because nowadays you can even take a sound and you can drop it into Native Instruments Contact. Contact will map it all out for you as long as you've got a good sample where it can do that. And that helps, but you're still, velocity curves and all that stuff still have to be edited manually. So we're heading in the right direction. We're not quite there yet,
Mhm.
But I think in another maybe 3 or 4 years, there's a good chance that it's going to be 10 times easier than it is now.
Definitely, yeah, like absolutely.
Then what you have to worry about is everybody flooding the market, right? Because now
Yeah.
the more the technology becomes accessible, the more people are accessing it.
Honestly, that's something that I at least I've seen people talk about it in like long form like, opinion pieces of
Mm-hmm.
people talking about the noise scene. There's a like general assumption almost that noise is easy to do and that
Mm-hmm.
it's an easy genre and there's no skill that goes into it,
Right.
which I've like kind of taken and have been able to kind of digest and like I think that's what really like separates good noise from bad noise or good drone from bad drone is
Mm-hmm.
like there's people that are going into it to kind of like no one that I know. Like I need to make like I don't know anyone who falls into like the category of like, oh, it's I just do it because like I just want to do I have no interest in the genre. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely people who are doing that in some capacity, but hey, it doesn't really get anywhere because there isn't like a passion behind it. And it I think at least with like me who listens to a lot of the genre, figuring it's really easy to figure out the intent of this genre is like this person cares about the movement and the genre
Right.
and the scene compared to people who don't and kind of fall into the categories of this is good noise, this is bad noise
Mm-hmm.
almost.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And if there's one thing I've learned doing music reviews on my podcast, even songs that I've been listening to for 30 or 40 years, when I'm doing a critical review versus a casual listen,
Mhm.
I find so many things in these songs that I thought I knew backwards and forwards. And then I'm hearing, oh, wait a minute, I never noticed that was in there before. That's been panned all the way to the left. I never picked up on that. And as you hear what really goes into some of these things, it's pretty amazing the depth of work. And I have a feeling that there's an element of first probably walking into it with a certain thing in your mind. Like people who don't like rap are not really going to give rap a chance, for
Yeah.
example. I think there's probably an element of that. Then there's the I don't really want to find anything in here to change my opinion, so I'm going to listen to it in a way that doesn't allow me to really appreciate it, and then they just build on that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It really depends on both the intent going into it as an artist and then
Right.
also what the listener is trying to take out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my work, at least studio recording stuff, is I try and be very like I try and make things open and attainable and like accessible sound wise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any like really some of my favorite drone albums that I've ever listened to are like hour and a half long one song thing and it's just a cello that has like three note changes and it's about of like very inaccessible like it's a lot of really inaccessible like just it's like inaccessible to most people and at
Mm-hmm.
least with this project I very much tried to make at least like the droning elements a lot more like able to be attained and like latched onto by most like give people a sense of like something to sink their teeth into that
Mm-hmm.
people who are really experienced in the genre are able to like oh this is really good and like it develops like this is a really well done thing but also people who are newer to like the movement and the genre like give them something to kind of like get their toe in the door like get their foot in the water and see
Right.
how things are.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, but it's the challenge is really the listener, right? And that's you can offer them that, but it's really up to them to be. I want to check this out when I'm in an open-minded mood and really just kind of go into it with what is this, as opposed
Yeah.
to what's this. There's a
Yeah.
there's a big difference in the experience you're going to have based on the attitude that you walk into it with. And
Definitely.
you can encourage them, you can try and inspire them, but at the end of the day, and this is really the challenge for everybody in any kind of entertainment now, whether it's poetry or songwriting or movies, it's hard to just find people in the right position at the right time.
Yeah, it's hard to like tailor someone's art.
Right.
I think a lot of the really good movies that like came out last year and like a lot of really good movies in general haven't tried to tailor their art, but
Hmm.
they more so tried to make people understand the thing.
Yeah.
And how they do that is different. I think a lot. I watched Marty Supreme recently. I
Hmm.
really liked it. It was a movie, and they had one of the craziest like marketing schemes that I've ever seen, like for a movie. The movie itself was like very clear in what it was like trying to do. It was very much like it wasn't trying to be like a PG, like it wasn't trying to be a accessible movie for people to
Hmm.
latch onto almost, but they were trying to make, at least in the marketing, make people get excited about the movie and like latch on to the idea of it and digest a very dense, like complex work and a very dense, complex character almost.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. I have not seen that yet.
It's
So, go ahead.
Oh no, it's I was just saying the movie's really good. It has
Hmm.
like Timothy Chalamet. It's about a ping pong player. It's so good.
Interesting. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you: are you working on anything new now, or what's your plan going forward?
Going forward, I have a few things in the works right now.
Hmm.
There's a few shows that I'm working on getting put together, and like a few things that I'm gonna perform live and do live, which I'm working on getting, put together.
Hmm.
I want to record more music. I really want to do more strictly noise stuff and like very strictly like crunchy, like the thing I do live, but in a studio environment setting.
Hmm.
So I want to do that. I have a few things that I've recorded that are going to be coming out soon, which I'm really excited about.
Cool.
There's things definitely that are in the works and like coming out soon. It's either I haven't gotten started on them yet, or I am not able to announce that they're coming out yet.
Hmm.
But I think very soon I'm going to have a lot more stuff on the table and a lot more stuff going and showing the collective world, basically.
Excellent. Well, I'm a big proponent of encouraging people to release their art. That does become kind of a stumbling block for a lot of people I know, where there's a certain understandable fear about putting something that has value and meaning to you that you've sat there and worked on and actually putting it out there for the world to do whatever they're going to do with it. And I applaud everyone who actually presses that button and says, this is released now. So, congratulations on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Was that a hard thing to do
Uh,
in the beginning?
Not really. I was able to. I had like a very arts background.
Mm-hmm.
I had taken a few college art classes and like gotten used to showing off like my work and what I do, and so like doing that, and I was really able to latch on to releasing art in a very like meaningful way,
Good.
and it still invokes fear of like I want will people perceive the album how I perceived it, and will people
Mm-hmm.
see like will people view it in the same way? But it's not even necessarily an issue with like getting the work out there and releasing the work for people almost.
Right. Well, I applaud you. I'm so excited that I got to meet you and talk to you, and I will definitely be following you in your career and seeing what you do next. I'm really looking forward to it. So, congratulations on everything so far. And I would just say keep that momentum going.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was really great to be on the show.
Thank you. And come back anytime.
I will let you know.
Thank you. And for you guys, thank you so much for listening. Like I said, as always, links are in the show notes. Guys, go check this stuff out for yourself. Don't just listen to me and my own opinion. And then as we are going forward this week, we're back on our regular schedule: Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Deep Purple Smoke on the podcast on Wednesday. A new episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. I'm just going to go ahead, based on some comments that I received from my dear friend Steve Coldwell, and apologize for this week's typical first of the month episode. While this is the actual first of the month episode, the first Wednesday episode is always dedicated to classical music. And my second part of my review of Vivaldi's The Four Seasons is coming out. I know Steve won't be listening to that episode based on his feedback on my thoughts from the first episode. But Steve, I encourage you to Well, don't listen to it. And then I've got Mark Robat coming back for part 3 of our ongoing TV series theme. And for those of you who haven't checked out our 8-hour podcast on Jaws, that is all out there, broken into 4 parts on YouTube and the audio feed. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, 10,000 Airplanes, for joining me for this episode. Guys, go check out the link. Seriously, it's really worth it. And you guys have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.